Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1 on Saturday and Sunday. Also at my site, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. There you'll find show notes for today's episode, all the old episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, plus all the other content that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So, wichitaliberty.org. Please look there. Well, today our special guest is Susan Humphries. She's a Republican who represents Kansas House District 99. That's a little bit of eastern Wichita and Andover in its surrounding areas. She served one term, and Susan, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV, but I hate to say she served one term. It sounds like you've been in prison.
Oh. No, I wouldn't call it that. No.
You served a term in Topeka.
That's
there,
right.
Anyway, so Susan, thank you. And of course, Carl, Peter, John here, back from vacation, our co-host. So the filing deadline is passed. We know who all the candidates are, except maybe in exceptional circumstances. Mm-hmm. Well, independents, we don't know who they are yet, and there are maybe a couple independents who will be prominent. So I saw that you as a Republican have no opposition in the primary election. That's the first week in August. Mm-hmm. But there are two Democrats running in the primary election. Yep. One of those will then advance to meet you in the November election. And I noticed I did some analysis today of the election list that of the 125 seats in the House of Representatives, 48 only had one candidate. Right.
I've heard that also. And I know that everyone was busy out recruiting. All sides. I heard a lot of it, but I guess in some places people understand it's a sacrifice to serve. Yeah. And so it's hard to get candidates, I think.
So sometimes people are not willing to serve.
I think so.
But also it's sometimes that some incumbents are just very popular.
Right.
And people look at that and say, oh, I could never beat him, so I even try. So
I think that's true.
A mix of both there.
Yep.
So do you have a favorite candidate for governor? And if not, how should Republicans and Democrats make a decision?
Okay, I do not have a favorite candidate for governor. I think we have three strong Republicans, and they each have positives, and they possibly have negatives. Mm-hmm. And I just would encourage people to do your research, find out, what do they stand for, and then we have to think what Republican could also beat the Democrat. It's something that we need to think of too.
Because I think there are at least one Democrat, I think Laura Kelly, who's probably going to win. She'll probably be a pretty formidable candidate.
Mm-hmm, I think so.
And there's this long history of whenever we have an election with an open seat, we switch parties. Right. So I don't know how much predictive value that has.
It is really important that the Republicans support who the nominee is and get out there and vote.
Well, we've had all the candidates. Well, the Seltzer campaign was not responsive, I'll say that. But other than that, Jim Barnett, Governor Collier, and Secretary of State Kobach have been on this show recently, and you can find all those at the archives of Wichita Liberty TV. Carl?
I wanted to throw out, do we need an age limitation like you have for Congress, Senate, and President in running for governor of Kansas, since both Republican and Democrat primaries will include high school students? Mm-hmm. And now, having said that, we've had cases where high school students, soon to graduate high school students or college students have run for the Kansas House and been elected.
Yes. So we did pass an age limit for governor. And there was a lot of discussion, and some wanted no age limit, some wanted 35, and I think we settled on 25. You have to be 25 now, and you have to be an elector, a resident, right? You have to be
there was someone
able
from
to
New
vote.
York wanting to run.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then also from John Whitmer told us that do you have to now be a human being because I wanted to run.
I'm not sure if we. I heard that. I'm not sure if we put that in. I hope that's.
Since we're talking about elections here, do you have any opinion on this Ron M. Estes thing that happened? Let me just explain for viewers real quick. Our incumbent congressman that has been on the show many times, Ron Estes, and on the deadline day or the day before, I think, another Republican, Ron M. Estes, also filed to run. This other Ron M. Estes has never run for anything in the past, not making himself available for interviews or anything. I think this is going to be traced back to one of the Democratic candidates in their campaign.
I think so. I think the way the the regular Ron Estes campaign handled it was really fine and well, and they just had people remember the M stands for, was it misunderstanding, misconception, the M, misleading is what it was, yeah. So I don't think they need to make too big a deal about it. The Ron Estes campaign, I think they did well what they said, and I think it'll be
do things like this, and there's someone running for Attorney General who calls himself Vermin Supreme, who does this all over the country. These things get a lot of media attention, and do you think they make a mockery out of some of these things?
Sometimes.
Because it's important who represents us in Congress
Absolutely.
and who is the Attorney General, Governor, and all sorts of things like that. So, okay, well, Susan Estes, hold on a moment. We're going to take a commercial break.
Susan Humphries. Susan Humphries.
Oh, Susan, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's a compliment if you call me Susan. She's wonderful. I love her.
We were just talking about Susan Estes, and of course she's been on here too. But anyway, let's take a moment off for a commercial break. I'll try to remember who our guest is, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks with Carl Peter John. Our special guest is Susan Humphries, who represents Kansas District 99, East Wichita and Andover in the Kansas House of Representatives. And I think, Susan, that people are just dying to know, how did you vote on HB 2650? Let me refresh your memory.
Please do.
HB 2650 designates the official state rock as greenhorn limestone, the official state mineral as galena, the official state gemstone as gelinite amber, and the official state fish as the channel catfish. Now, this seems like, something that should not be important, but there were amendments, there was debate, the governor signed this. I noticed that. Well, explain to us how you voted on it.
Well, I was in Federal and State Affairs Committee, heard it. I loved the fourth graders that came and testified.
So sometimes these bills, like the state reptile and stuff like that, are done as an educational experience for young people.
Right, and it was great. I loved it. And we voted that the state rock would be the limestone. And it was changed in the Senate committee to be the greenhorn limestone. And
it can't just be limestone.
It should be limestone. People can remember that. Now it's going to be mixed up. What's our rock? I don't know. And so I didn't like the fact that they changed it. I think we should have kept it at limestone. And so I didn't appreciate the fact that they changed it.
And when this got over to the Senate, after the House had passed it, Senator Tom Holland wanted to, he did amend to include the official state grape, not just a grape, but a white grape and a red grape too. But the Senate on a voice vote said, no, that amendment is not. I didn't even know that. But I mean, there was someone objected that it was not germane, so there had to be a ruling on that. I mean, a lot of stuff that goes on there. And when people say, why don't when these people, legislators, leadership in particular, complain about not having enough time to do important things, then why are they spending time doing stuff like this? Okay,
we have to have a little levity too every once in a while. We do important things, and it's serious, but we have to have fun too.
Okay, well, let's get to something that is important. I know that you felt strongly about, which is the Adoption Protection Act that passed this year.
Yes.
And maybe how that weaves in with the Masterpiece Cake decision from the United States Supreme Court earlier this week.
Right, so the Supreme Court decision, U.S. Supreme Court decision came out Monday, and it was a 7-2 decision. So that was a strong decision by the Supreme Court. But people are calling it narrow because the scope was narrow. Basically, we would have.
So this is the Baker Cake Shop in Denver, Colorado,
right?
Which a gay couple wanted him to custom make a cake for their wedding. He refused to, based on his religious beliefs.
And he said, "You may buy any cake in my shop. I won't create a cake specifically for this occasion, but you are welcome to be my customer." And the Supreme Court said that basically religious exercise cannot be trampled upon, that it is important and it is okay to have it in the marketplace. We would have liked a broader decision saying that First Amendment rights of free speech and free exercise of religion are absolutely protected, and this was more narrow.
Because I think part of it was Justice Kennedy, I think, said that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission or whatever was biased against him, and that was part of the reasoning, wasn't it?
Yes, and it has to be neutral as you apply the First Amendment rights according to religion. It needed to be neutral, and they weren't neutral.
So how do we distinguish things like this, like a baker or a photographer or something like that, versus what I think is pretty well settled law about public accommodations, that hotels and restaurants may not discriminate against serving black people, minorities, for example, no matter what their beliefs are about anything. Isn't that the law?
Yes, that is the law, the civil rights law. And I mean, this is different because it's not the protected class of race, ethnicity, nationality. That's what the difference is.
Okay. So the Adoption Protection Act in Kansas, then, how does that fit in?
It fits in because basically the bill that was passed protected the religious exercise of adoption and foster care child placing agencies to be able to practice as they have been for years and for generations, just that they can decide who they think that children should be placed with.
So there are these third parties, I'm thinking like, isn't it something like Catholic Social Services or something like that, as an example, who investigate parents as suitable, parents who want to adopt and try to determine their suitability. Is that right?
Right. In every child placing agency, there's about 35 in the state. About 12 are faith-based, but they all have criteria. You have to be able to pass a home study. You have to not have an uncovered swimming pool in your backyard. You can't have a trampoline. I mean, there's certain things that all of them investigate and decide if these parents are suitable.
So some of the faith-based ones have decided we don't want to place children in same-sex couple households.
That is kind of the bottom line, and it's not that they decided that, it's that they their criteria says the best place for a child is with a home with a married mother and father, and that's how they've been operating for generations. So this didn't give anybody any new rights, didn't let anybody do something different, discriminate against anyone. And there are many other agencies that singles or non-traditional families can go to, and they can be adoptive parents and foster parents.
So I mean, it doesn't mean that gays cannot adopt in Kansas.
No, they have the right to, 100%.
They have to choose the right adoption agency.
Which they have been doing.
Yeah. And I think most parents would, this is not just a decision you make on a lark. They probably think about it long and hard. So, okay, well, that explains that then. So we are going to take a moment off. Carl, I know you've got a question, but we'll be back in just a moment with another segment of Wichita Liberty TV. Well, welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, co-host Carl Peterjohn, our special guest Susan Humphries, a member of the Kansas Legislature from East Wichita and Andover. So, Carl.
Yes, some national news publications talking about the adoption issue pointed out that roughly half the states have gone in the direction Kansas has gone in terms of allowing protecting religious choice in terms of adoptions. Roughly half the states are going in the direction that the critics of this legislation here have sought. Do you see this part of it as a national experiment, and do you have any thoughts in terms of the national aspect of this as opposed to the Kansas side of it?
I think there's about 9 or 10 states that have passed something similar to what we've done, and the reason that we've done that is because there does seem to be a push nationally by groups like the ACLU to kind of target faith-based adoption and child placing agencies. And so we felt like it was important to protect the rights of the agencies that we have in Kansas, because agencies have closed in Illinois, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., San Francisco. Right now there's a big push going on in the city of Philadelphia to close faith-based adoption agencies, and children are being hurt because of it. And so I think there is some sort of national stage right now about this, and we wanted to be a little bit proactive to protect what we've got in Kansas.
And I think part of the legislation protects the faith-based agencies from lawsuits. Is that right?
It does.
Okay, so that's important,
Yes.
I think.
Well, in terms of the national side of it, because we're getting states, I saw that California recently announced that they've added Oklahoma to the states where they're not going to allow their employees to go there. And of course, Kansas is already on their list. And I was curious if you had any thoughts in terms of this sort of battle among the states on what directions policy should proceed as driven by the state governments as opposed to nationally.
I think we need to look and see what really are the ramifications of that, because we know we held some of the NCAA tournaments and it didn't keep the California schools from coming here. So is it a political move or ploy just to say something, or does it have teeth? I think that we need to do what's right in Kansas and then not worry about what these possible repercussions might be.
Well, Susan, there was a lot of activity on schools and school finance this year. One thing, besides the spending, was there any action one way or the other regarding school choice this year?
I'm not on the Education Committee or the Education Budget Committee, so they may have had some discussions, but there was nothing that came to the House floor as far as that went, which
means
disappointing.
Kansas students still have very little opportunity for school choice, unfortunately.
That's true. Our tax credit scholarship is still a wonderful program.
And it's
we've
been
got
expanded to where individuals can participate and receive a tax credit, not just corporations.
Right. So we've got that, but we need to do more because we need the accountability, the market pressures to make schools better.
Now, the school spending advocates are going to say that there's this Kansas Supreme Court that holds schools accountable. Do you think that works very well?
Well, that court is saying 25% of our children are either underserved or underperforming. So I don't think that's working very well, because 25%, that's not, we need to do better than that.
And they're concentrated amongst the minority and low income students as well. So I think it was on May 22nd, the Kansas Supreme Court heard arguments about the school finance case. Yes. Probably in the month of June, they're going to have to make a ruling. Do you have any idea which way it's going to go? Is the court going to say you guys are okay, or do you have to spend a lot more?
Well, it's hard to know what they're going to say, but the questions I felt from the justices were very antagonistic as the state was making their case. The questions were, I don't know if you all listened, but the questions were pretty pointed and, like I said, antagonistic. So, maybe they're going to say, okay, for this year, but we'll come back next year. I mean, it's the never-ending litigation that we need to do something about.
Well, this creates massive uncertainty in terms of Kansas finances.
Right.
And the question I'd have is, can we do anything to eliminate this perpetual uncertainty? Because if you're planning to expand a business in Kansas or create one, the fiscal uncertainty and regulatory uncertainty here is massive.
Right. The overreaching justices, in my opinion, are the issue, and we need to do something about it. It might be a constitutional amendment. It might be standing up and saying there's 3 branches here. I don't know what the answer is, but we need to have that discussion for sure.
Because the plaintiffs are saying, they're saying you need to spend like another $1 billion. Yeah. It's a huge amount of money. If the Supreme Court says what has been passed this year is not sufficient, there could be the possibility of a special session this summer. Is that right?
That's what I've heard. There could be a special session.
We've had that. Remember, Carl, in 2005, in response to a Supreme Court ruling in a previous school finance case, there was that, and you said you went there to cover and keep track of that in the summer.
This has been the litigation goes back literally into the last century. It's had various case names, Gannon, Montoy. There's a number of them. I think it was USD 229 at one point. But the bottom line is, are you ready to go back to Topeka for the summer for a special session? And with our time, we might hold off and use that.
Right.
We'll answer that when we come back from our next break.
Yeah, and we should probably pass a resolution saying we're not going to pay for air conditioning that building this summer. So let's take another break here on Wichita Liberty TV. We shall be right back. Well, welcome back to our last segment of Wichita Liberty TV. For today, I'm Bob Weeks, Carl Peter John co-host, our special guest, Susan Humphries from the Kansas House of Representatives. And Susan, one of the bills you mentioned you were disappointed that did not pass was House Bill 2228.
Right.
This was kind of a complicated bill. It had a lot of pieces to it, but basically, when the federal government passed some tax reform, it's not going to fully benefit Kansans unless this bill had passed. Is
right,
that
exactly.
In a nutshell? Because
of the higher deductions, the standard deduction, and we don't have a very high standard deduction in Kansas. And if you don't itemize in the federal, then you cannot itemize in Kansas. So Kansans are going to get basically a tax increase because they can't itemize their deductions. They have no voice. There was no due process. They're just getting a tax increase. And so the bill was going to decouple those two things so that you could go ahead and itemize in Kansas.
So this doesn't affect the ability of Kansas to experience the full federal tax cuts.
That's right.
Just the
was only dealing with state.
Yeah, because usually it's always been that Kansas and federal taxes were fairly tightly coupled. You would just take your deductions from your federal and flow it on to Kansas and so forth.
Exactly.
So this bill got 21 votes in the Senate, which passed. But only 59 in the House, so that was 4 votes short of that.
It was so disappointing. I just don't understand how that many representatives felt like Kansans could just have a tax increase without any sort of voice or and not thinking this is their money. We need to let them have the opportunity to spend it, to give it, to do whatever they want to with it.
Well, in 2017 and this year, we've had 2 major increases in the income tax, and now we have this on top of it.
Exactly.
Will taxes, what do you think the chances that taxes will be the number one issue in the Kansas House races in August and November?
I think there's one side that would like to really make it the big issue and to say, look what your representatives have done, the ones who voted for the tax increase. And then there are these who have not voted for your taxes to increase. So, but then one side's going to not want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, not everyone agrees. There was an editorial from the Kansas Center for Economic Growth, which called this HB 2228, if it had passed, it called it extremely fiscally irresponsible. It will cost the state at least $494 million over the next 5 years, revenue that Kansas cannot afford to forego at this time. So that's kind of reflective of a viewpoint that says, the state government has a higher priority than you and me and everybody else.
That's right. And that money belongs to the state instead of to the people.
Yeah, but that's from the liberal Kansas Center for Economic Growth.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, we've got to put it in the context. Whenever I often hear some other groups referred to as the conservative, I think it's appropriate that we return the favor in terms of clear identification for viewers out there.
Group.
Because you have a group that supports increased spending and taxes. It's perfectly appropriate if that's what the voters and the citizens here in Kansas want or not.
But they hardly ever come out and say increase taxes. They say we need to be fiscally responsible. And I think that simply means you need to have your revenues match your expenditures. And there's 2 ways to do that: raise taxes or lower tax.
Exactly.
And that's why a balanced budget amendment at the federal level is controversial, because you can balance the budget by raising taxes.
That's right.
It's been a challenge at local as well as state government. The question I'd go in terms of the fiscal side of it, though, I think Kansas, with all the tax increases we've had, is going to is struggling economically. All the national data, and Bob's put up an awful lot on his website, showing Kansas is lagging behind the other states, and I view it due to higher taxes
way down,
and because of scorecards like the Tax Foundation will come up with. Kansas is going to be sinking like a stone.
Wow.
We seem to be chasing California, which in my view is chasing Venezuela in terms of their fiscal policies. But is there a way of trying to communicate certain steps? When I was a county commissioner, we tried to put in a requirement, and I think it's still in the county platform, to require voter approval before property taxes could be raised. Is there some measures we could do at Topeka to try and address that?
Something like that would be great. We did put into effect the performance-based budgeting, and that everyone is saying, well, that's going to start having an effect this year, so we'll see about that. And then, I don't know about putting it to the voters. It's a great anything that helps get the spending under control. But it's when more money is just pouring in, people can find places to spend it. That's where we have to be self-disciplined.
Well, we've tried that in the past. We remember the Taxpayer Bill of Rights fights, at least proposals in Kansas maybe 10 years ago.
It was never enacted, but 3 of our 4 surrounding states have provisions.
Colorado.
Yes, even Colorado.
Missouri, Oklahoma, and Colorado.
They always chip at it and come up with loopholes and exceptions. It still, I think, has done a lot to hold down the growth of spending in Colorado. For that to have any effect in Kansas, I think we'd really have to have a constitutional amendment, which means 2/3 of each of the chamber and then a majority vote of the people. And it doesn't seem like there's 2/3 of the representatives and senators.
Not right now. Maybe next year.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Okay. Well, we are out of time for today. So Susan Humphries of the Kansas House of Representatives, Republican from East Wichita and Andover, thank you very much
Thank
for
you for
appearing
having
today.
me.
Carl, thank you for
Carl.
your contribution. Thanks to you, the viewers. We'll see you back again next week.